So I decided to make this video because I've seen a lot of stuff going on in the world and things like that, and I watch the news and I see myself getting all worked up, and I call family members who agree with me and I vent to them and I talk to them about it. It's just a back and forth of agreement and reassurance, and I do have a few friends who I can talk to who are on the other side who don't agree with anything I have to say, and it's good conversation. It makes I feel like both sides do their due diligence and not just sit back and act the way you'd act if you agree with somebody, and you actually do some research and look into some things. But I do feel like there are other people who I hesitate to have conversation with, I hesitate to talk to, because I don't want things to get out of hand. I don't want to get in arguments. I don't want to be accused of things. I don't want to be accused of being a certain thing. And I don't want facts to be ignored. So I feel like making these videos will make me feel better. I can get information out there, and if people choose to listen to it, they can listen to it. If not. So the first thing I want to talk about was the executive action that was taken on guns recently. What really got me thinking about this, aside from the fact that I didn't like it and didn't agree with it, was I saw a clip of Rand Paul on TheView, and he brought up an interesting side of the argument that I personally have never brought up to anybody when talking about it, and I think it's a really good point. It's actually something that was probably one of the bigger reasons that it always bothered me. I never got there. I never got to that point. So I'm going to play the clip and then come back and talk about it a little.
The problem, though, is if we allow the precedent of a Congress not passing laws and the president doing it, you might get very dangerous things, like, let's say, internment of the Japanese, or let's say spying on all the civil rights leaders, or spying on the Vietnam War protesters.
Been done.
That's what I mean, but it's all done because of too much executive power. The checks and balances are incredibly important to me, and Montesquieu was one of the philosophers that our founding fathers looked to, and he said that when the executive begins to legislate, that a form of tyranny.
Okay, so I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but there are some things that I agree with him on that I don't think are brought up by other people enough, and I think that the point he makes about the executive action that was taken on guns is a really good point, and it needs to be thought about by everybody, because I think a lot of people get swept up into, oh, they agree with more gun control, they agree with stricter gun control, and they just automatically default to anything that gets done to push that forward is a good thing. And he brings up the fact that what's really bothersome to a lot of people, including myself, more so than what was passed, because honestly what was passed, Obama himself admitted, would have done nothing to stop any of the mass shootings, and it really just extended background checks. Now, I will get into some other stuff later where there's some wording in the executive action that's very troublesome outside of gun debate and any of that stuff, but I'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing is, so to kind of relate to the other side, suppose, say Trump wins the presidential election, gets into office, one of the first things he does is he passes a executive action about abortion, either completely outlawing it or saying you have to go through a specific background check before you can get an abortion. People would lose their minds. It would be an overreach. It would be, too much power. It shouldn't be done. It should go through Congress. It should go through the Senate, blah, blah, blah. So you have to, when stuff like this happens, especially speaking about executive actions, when it's something that overwhelmingly is unpopular throughout the country, every poll they do, everything, people who don't own guns are against stricter gun control. It's not something that is popular. And when a president goes and passes an executive action on something that's not popular, you're circumventing representation. We elected these people to represent us in the Congress and in the Senate, and really the reason he can't get any of this stuff through Congress is because the people came out and said, we don't want these things, so we're gonna elect people who we know won't let you do them. So he's circumventing that by doing this, and if it was done by the other side, that's kind of the shoes you have to put yourself in. Forget about what it's about. Forget about that it's about guns. Forget about that it's just stricter background checks. Forget anything about what it is, except for the fact that it's a polarizing issue in the country that isn't popular. That's not popular. The majority of people don't want it. So if you allow him to do this, then you are basically not only supporting what he's done, but you're supporting the idea that it's okay for the president to do something like that. And that is very troublesome. And if you watch more of that video, there's also one of the hosts, I know a couple of their names, I don't really know who any of them are, brings up, well, what is he supposed to do? He can't get any traction, he can't get anything done. Rand Paul says he needs to come to Congress, he needs to go through. And he's exactly right. The reason he can't get traction is because the people don't want this. The majority of people in this country do not want stricter gun control. It's just a fact. Every time they do polls, every poll, anything that's done, people don't want stricter gun control. There are small sects of people who want stricter gun control, and there are a lot of polls who they word it, oh, should there be more background checks, things like that. It's worded in a way that, yeah, it's kind of hard to argue, no, they shouldn't do this. And I'm not against background checks, and like I said, even what he did pretty much is nothing. It's a symbolic gesture, and that's what should be scary to people. That's what should be an issue with people, is he's literally doing this, seeing, what are they going to let me get away with? What can I get away with? And it's why he had to have lawyers sit down and pore over this thing to make sure he didn't do anything unconstitutional, because he's teetering on that line and he knows it. And allowing him to do this and supporting it, I've seen people post stuff on Facebook that he's some kind of hero, and thank you for basically thank you for circumventing the American people. If you want that, and this gets misconstrued a lot of times because it's used as an argument of, oh, get out of the country if you don't like it, get out of the country. There are other places where there's an overall ruler who circumvents the people, does what he feels is best for the people, and that's the end of the story. You can move there if that's what you like. That's not what America's about. It's never been about, and there's no reason it should be about that. That's talk about anti-American. I mean, I've seen people calling people anti-American for agreeing with Trump on certain issues. This is the epitome of anti-American. Thank you for ignoring what the American people want and passing something because I agree with it. That's crazy. That's crazy. And when people need to start thinking about it in those terms, because if you're going to allow him to decide what he thinks is best for the American people, you're going to have to allow a Republican to decide what's best for the American people when one of them ends up winning the White House at some point or another. So I really think that people need to start thinking about that before they just blindly defend things and say stuff like, act like this guy's some kind of hero. I mean, he's doing the exact opposite of what the country's about. So there's another clip in here where Whoopi Goldberg says something about guns that I think is used a lot by the president, and I've heard her do it actually on another occasion too, and I've heard some other people do it, and I think I'll play the clip and then I'll talk about it.
See, I'm a gun owner. You know, I don't mind that you know that I have a gun. You can come to my house and look for it. You can get all whatever you need. I don't understand why anyone objects to getting rid of automatic weapons. Automatic weapons, they're not for hunting. They do nothing. They're only there to kill. And you'll notice that a lot of the things that have happened with automatic weapons. When we see that, why don't we say, you know, who really needs to have one other than people who are at war? Yeah, what do you think about?
Truly automatic weapons we don't have. You know, we banned truly automatic weapons, I think, in 1930.
Right, but we still got a lot of them around. Come on.
Well, what we have is not automatic weapons, so we have semi-automatic. So they fire in a fairly fast sequence, but you can't pull.
Okay, so automatic weapons. I've heard this thrown around a lot, and I've heard insinuation about what an automatic weapon is. And people who know guns, who, you know, are aware of guns, many of which are not for gun control. Most of the people who are for gun control know little to nothing about guns, have never owned one, have never touched one, all that. Automatic weapons brings up, in most people, the idea of Tommy guns and gangsters in the 1920s, you know, running around cutting people in half with their machine guns and things like that. And that is exactly what an automatic weapon is. and they are illegal. There are a few people with permits who can own them. The majority of people cannot get them. I cannot go buy one right now. I couldn't go anywhere in the country and go buy one. It's just, you can't get them. They are not legal. Semi-automatic weapons are legal. Semi-automatic is very similar to a revolver in the fact that you pull the trigger, the bullet fires, and then you have to let go of the trigger and pull it again to fire another bullet. That's a semi-automatic weapon. When she makes the assertion that automatic weapons are used in recent crimes, they've been used in recent crimes. Oh, she makes a comment, oh, well, you know what I mean, we still have them. Those things aren't true. I don't recall there being automatic weapons used in any news story that I've seen about shootings. And I live in Baltimore, so there are plenty of news stories about shootings, and I don't remember hearing a single one being used automatic weapons. The last time I ever saw a news story where an automatic weapon was used was when I was watching Cocaine Cowboys, the documentary, and it was the 1980s in Miami when the drug wars were going on. You had drug cartels fighting it out in the streets. I've never seen automatic weapons used in any sort of mass shooting, any of that stuff. So the issue here is this is either ignorance or it's purposely trying to deceive. Now, she says she's a gun owner, and also I'd like to point out, she says she's a gun owner, and she claims to be perfectly fine with anyone coming in her house to check on her gun and check her registration and this and that. So she's basically saying that federal agents can come in my house, I don't care. I'm not buying that for a second. That's more bullcrap. If she's okay with that, then I feel sorry for her, because it's a sad situation if you really believe that you're just okay with people coming in your house and checking on your guns and your registration, or anything else for that matter, checking if I have an Xbox or not. I don't want people just coming in my house. But anyway, aside from that, so what she's doing is she's implanting in the minds and getting cheered by her audience, who I'm sure mostly don't know anything about guns. She's putting in their minds that these guns that are outlawing, and they always show the assault rifle and this and that, and it's always an AR-15 coming up on the screen when they're talking about it. People see that don't know what an automatic weapon is, or a semi-automatic weapon, or what that weapon is at all, and they assume that gun, if you take that gun and you pull the trigger, that rounds are just going to keep coming out, boom, 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 just like a Tommy gun or any machine gun. They think that those are machine guns, because honestly, I didn't know a lot about guns when I was younger and things like that, and most of what I knew about guns up until recently was from video games. And I found out that quickly that legal guns are not fully automatic like they are in the video games, and when they're showing wartime AR-15s and things like that the military has. But that's what really bothers me, is that deception is used to push gun control, and I think it needs to be fought more by people on the other side. And I'm sure Rand Paul I'm sure he's watched TheView before, and he knew what he was getting himself into. That if you try and argue with Whoopi Goldberg at all, she's just going to start screaming and lose her mind and act like an idiot, because she's done it a million times. And I'm sure that's part of the reason he kind of just backed off the argument. But I think it happens way too often. I think that it's allowed to happen. I think people are allowed to get away with it. The president gets away with it all the time in his speeches, talking about automatic weapons. There are no automatic weapons. There are very few, and someone would have to show me a news clip where an automatic weapon was used, because I almost have never heard of it. And at the end of the day, it's an illegal gun. They're used to commit crimes all the time. So passing gun control is not going to stop that. You're not going to get rid of all the illegal guns by passing gun control, regardless of what it is. So I'll use that to segue into a conversation I was having with my friend, and we were talking, and we were talking about gun control, and I don't think that I had said anything about Obama coming to take our guns or anything, but he was like, oh, it's not like Obama's trying to take your guns, or so it came up. So I was watching, I think it was Louder with Crowder. Oh yeah, he was breaking down Obama's town hall full of invited guests that he did after he passed his executive action. And he was talking about how there was a conversation Obama had where he was saying, oh, it's definitely a conspiracy theory if people think I'm going to take their guns. That's a total conspiracy theory. There's, it's way off. There's no basis for it. This and that. Well, let me play a clip for you real quick.
A couple of decades ago, Australia had a mass shooting, similar to Columbine or Newtown. And Australia just said, well, that's it. We're not seeing that again. And basically imposed very severe, tough gun laws, and they haven't had a mass shooting since. I mean, our levels of gun violence are off the charts. There's no...
Okay, so as Crowder brought up in his video, that clip is exactly why people think Obama's going to try and take their guns. And it's exactly why people have a reason to think he's going to try and take their guns. I did some research about the Australia gun laws a while ago because it had been brought up like it always is, and people were talking about it. I think it was probably after this clip had come out. So I have a link at the bottom that you can go to and you can check out what the actual situation was. So essentially what they did was they pretty much outlawed all guns that weren't, I think shotguns maybe are still legal in some certain rifles, like single shot rifles. I don't remember the exactly what's legal and what's not, but basically pretty much everything's illegal. Essentially, they said that just protecting yourself was not good enough reason for you to be able to own a gun. So you can own a gun in Australia, but it's next to impossible. It's essentially the same thing that people, I live in Maryland, the same people that people in Maryland deal with when they're trying to get a concealed carry license. They have concealed carry license in Maryland, but they are almost impossible to get because you have to give a good reason why you need a concealed carry license, aside from the fact that I'm afraid to go down in one of the most dangerous cities in the country without a gun on me because I don't feel safe, which logically you would think would be a good enough reason, but the government says no. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there was a mandatory buyback. That is a seizure of guns, is what that is. Regardless of how anyone wants to twist it, how you politically want to put it. In Australia, if you had a time period where you had to give your guns back to the government, and if you did not do it and you were caught with a gun after that, you were penalized as if you bought that gun on the black market and it was illegal and you never legally owned it. Now, like I said, you can own guns in Australia. They're all registered. So if the government up and decides, well, we don't feel like you should own a gun anymore, they can come to your house, say, we're taking the gun back. You need to give it back to us. We know you have it. And that's something that Rand Paul brought up as well. It's the registration that's the issue. It's not the background checks and things like that. There's plenty of ground to be had there in a conversation about background checks without registration and things like that when it comes to gun control. So this would be why there's a conspiracy theory that Obama's going to take people's guns, is because he openly has supported and advocated that what Australia did was good and we need to consider doing the same thing. So he's openly said that he's for taking people's guns back and forcing them to give their guns back. Let's see here. Okay, so this will bring me back to what I was talking about earlier with the executive action that was passed and some of the questionable wording in there. I'll put the quotes that I'm reading on the bottom of the video, but So the first thing that I saw, someone actually brought this up in a video I was watching. I don't remember who it was. There's wording in there: if you're in the business of selling firearms, you must get a license and conduct background checks. Okay, so the first thing is, what does "in the business of selling firearms" mean? Does that mean if you sell a single gun, you're in the business of selling firearms? If you sell 5 guns, you're in the business of selling firearms? Or do you have to sell 100 guns? It doesn't say. So there's another paragraph after that that says quantity and frequency of sales are relevant indicators. There's no specific threshold number of firearms purchased or sold that triggers the licensure requirement. But it is important to note that even a few transactions, when combined with other evidence, can be sufficient to establish that person is engaged in the business. For example, courts have upheld convictions for dealing without a license when as few as 2 firearms were sold, or when only 1 or 2 transactions took place, when other factors also were present. So my concern here is this, to me, opens the door up for the ATF to come in or police. I'm not sure. I think this is only at a federal level, I assume. I don't think the local cops could come in and use this as a precedent to arrest people, but it still opens the door for federal agencies to come in and arrest people and throw them in jail for selling a gun to their neighbor because they didn't get a license to do a background check. Now, I know it differs from state to state about how you can and can't sell guns. Like, I believe here in Maryland, where gun laws are crazy strict, even though we have Baltimore City, that's, one of the smallest major cities in the country, yet constantly in the top 5 in murder rate. But anyway, so I believe here I couldn't go to my neighbor's house and sell him my gun because there's registration processes. I think you have to be a licensed dealer to sell guns. As far as I know, I've never looked into it. I've never tried to sell a gun, so I'm not positive about that. So this seems to be an overarching thing that they were trying to stop from states where it's easier to buy and sell guns, on an individual level. But again, my issue is, so if I live in one of those states and I sell a gun to my neighbor and something happens for whatever reason and the government comes in and arrests me, I don't think that they would ever be able to get a conviction based on the way this is worded. But that means I have to go to jail, I have to pay a lawyer to defend me, and I lose all of that time, whether it's in jail or in court, from my life that is taken up because of some executive action that was taken by a president to circumvent what the people actually wanted. This, to me, just seems like, I don't know how anybody could defend this. I don't see how, as an American who believes in the checks and balances and the way our system is set up, could defend this, regardless of if you're for gun control or not for gun control. This isn't the way to do it. There are ways to do things, and this is not the way to do it. You sit down with Congress and you work something out. There is no ban on gun control issues being passed. It's just not true. But if you look at a lot of what's tried to get passed through and what's been shot down, and the Obama administration is notorious for this, they send through crazy leftist bills into Congress, it gets shot down, and then they run and complain to the public, oh, I can't get anything done. And it has nothing to do with not being able to get anything done. There's no attempt to do anything. You're not attempting to actually get anything done. You're just you're trying to get something through that you know won't go through, so you can go cry to the public, I can't get it done, and then you can write an executive order, and you get praised, and you get support from people who most days wouldn't be for this overreaching government, but somehow they've been completely turned around, and it's a total 180. It blows my mind. So that is pretty much that. And the penalty for this is 5 years or $250,000 in fines. So that's what you'd be facing if you sold a gun to your neighbor and without getting a license, do a background check, and they decided to come and Which actually just occurred to me. I didn't see this when I was reading the executive action, but I don't think that they actually check if you're actually doing the background checks. I think you just have to have a license to do it. So that's interesting. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, all right. So that's my venting for the day. Hopefully, people learn something. You know, you can comment on it. I'd be interested to see what people have to say. And I don't know. I'll probably make more of these because this isn't the only issue that I feel like talking about.